Arts+Labs is a coalition of technology and creative companies that came together with the idea that many of the issues that we're facing in the digital age will be better addressed through collaboration rather than litigation and confrontation, which has very, very often been the model in which many of these issues do get addressed.
What you're meeting about today is creativity, commerce, copyright, counterfeiting, and policy. I think that the acoustic guitar, like the MP3 or like a knife, is a tool, and you can use it in many different ways. You can be destructive with it, or you can be positive with it. So there are moments in time when I look back on that moment in time, and I think how far I've come from being that girl with the acoustic guitar, and a lot of that is because of how I've embraced technology over the years and how I've been confronted with certain copyright issues and what I did with them. But I still believe that you still have to have a copyright law. You still have to be able to protect the boundaries. There have been times where I've said, no, you cannot use Tom's Diner for example, pornography. That's probably been one of the only times I've said no. I'm like, well, I don't understand why you would want to use that song for pornography. I don't think it would be very effective. Well, you see what I mean when I sing it later. Anyway, I think it's the artist's right to say no if you want to. But why not say yes if you can? But you need the copyright law there. I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the corner. I am waiting at the counter for the man to pour the coffee.
I'm going to kind of go down the line here and ask each of our panelists to provide some perspective on what's been happening recently in Congress. I think many of you know that right before Memorial Day, the Senate Judiciary Committee marked up the Preventing Real Online Threats to Economic Creativity and Theft of Intellectual Property Act, which we have shortened to the Protect IP Act.
First of all, number one, I am delighted that your conference talks about protecting IP from the ground up. And Congress needs to realize that you've got to move away from legislating to technology and realize that you need to focus on the creator and the end use. In a period of time in our nation's history when we are talking about jobs, look at what theft of intellectual property cost us. The estimates for the G20 nations are that you're losing over $600 billion a year and 2.5 million jobs.
Unfortunately, looking at DNS as a mechanism for enforcing intellectual property is so highly flawed to be simply impossible and counterproductive.
There's no reason why the United States should have to be continued to suffering for being ripped off by foreign thieves while we wait for other countries to get their act together. Point blank, rogue sites have killed.
That this is ultimately a jobs issue in this country. This is about protecting people who are really not able to protect themselves.
Everybody out there makes money off of my work except me.
This bill's about the out-and-out theft that goes on these sites that are dedicated to infringement.
We are already seeing in our industry, significant economic impact from piracy, and that impact has an immediate effect on the number of movies we make, on the risks we take, on the kinds of investments that we make.
Technology that created the problem is now actually trying to help solve the problem.
We are a company that's suffered a lot of piracy over the last few years as we've become more successful. It has slowed down our growth rate. It has inevitably led to us hiring less people. We're a company that grew from 100 people back in 2002 to over 2,000 now. But obviously in an environment like this, we're not going to be a job-creating powerhouse. And yet I think this Protect IP Act would do a lot to make it a much more customer-centric approach.
Our problem that we're seeing is there's lots of piracy, pirated content available on sites that make things very easy to upload and download. A consumer believes that they're on a site that's supported by a content owner when it actually isn't. And they think, well, it's so easy, it must be.
I find Netflix is on in my house probably at least as much as the cable television with my kids watching it. I think these are experiences that consumers really like. They're licensed experiences, and they're creating tremendous value.
The term we're using a lot is frictionless licensing. And one of the things that's been difficult in the music industry and the photography industry and others is licensing, getting a license to use it. And we look at that Apple infrastructure and we look at something like iTunes, and it made the licensing component, the ease of acquisition, simple.
We represent over probably 200 filmmakers, and so we're mobilizing our force to be a strong, unified voice in the movement to make illegal downloading uncool.
Fully 84% of people that don't play an instrument or make music wish they could. And so Music Mastermind, we empower that goal of being able to create, being able to enter the musical dialogue and become fluent in the musical language. And we show people, we actually make it fun to do, we kind of gamify the whole process, and they get to see that they own something, that they've made something. And by them actually experiencing that for the first time, they starts to understand the value of making something and owning intellectual property.
There's something like $60 billion worth of U.S. software being stolen every single year around the world. So I'm often amused by these whole notions of the trade deficit, because when I travel, a lot of people use a lot of American stuff, and yet they don't pay for it. And you sort of ask yourself, what would the real trade deficit be if the music that people listen to was paid for, the software was paid for? And if we can just get the environment and the model right here in the U.S., then we can suggest very strongly that other countries consider that, and that will create just this benign environment for content players.
We have this notion of value equals experience over frequency. So the value of any experience is direct proportion to the frequency of that event. So by limiting, we only do live content, and we try to create something special out of it. So we also set out to look at what was happening in the real world, so to speak, that people were finding value, and that's the live show, and what was happening online where people really were engaging, and sort of we try to put together this intimacy of like chatting with each other, which people were doing online, and bringing the two together.
Through all of this economic and technological disruption, communication is very key. Artists really have to look at this from a marketing and business perspective and know what your consumers are, who they are, and not just demographics, it's psychographics.
You can't just be a recording artist anymore. It's a total 360 experience in order to be successful. The merch side is really big now, and so you're
it's
right.
The brand.
And it means you got to work that much harder.
You are a brand.
Yeah.
And I don't really feel like we need to suffer through challenges of people stealing our work, monetizing it, and then not compensating us for it. And I really have a great respect for people who defend their copyrights. I had a conversation. I was walking through the halls with John Sebastian a number of years ago, and we were actually headed to Sonny Bono's office when Sonny was still in office and alive, and we were talking about copyright. And I said, how do you protect your copyright? How do you do that? He said, I treat it like a strainer.
And it wasn't even until the 1980s that creators were in a position to start pushing for rights to own copyright on anything. It's about going on eBay and seeing people sell T-shirts with my paintings on them. In Indonesia. Do they even know who I am in Indonesia? I don't know. Apparently they do. There are people selling paintings of mine in Russia, print on demand. I can't stop these people, but I'm not getting any benefits from this. I made a public statement about piracy back in November.
The real challenge for us, for artists, who are, after all, kind of isolated people, we work as individuals scattered across the country. The challenge for us is to find a way to come together and to get a grip on our secondary marketing, on our secondary rights, and find a way to market that in ways that we control the content.
However, and I know it gets to be a touchy subject here, we're going to have to band together to really define what copyright is going to be in the future, because without that, I mean, all of our revenue, all of our money sources come from Section 105, Section 106, and on down. We have to get ahead of it, and we have to band together.
You know, the consumer now has a huge voice. It has affected brands. It has affected countries. And, you know, the communication triangle has been flipped on its head. And by the communication triangle, I simply mean that there used to be a few people talking and everyone was listening, and now we're all talking and very few people are listening. And in the music industry, it has directly affected an industry that's gone from hundreds of artists making millions of dollars to millions of artists making hundreds of dollars. Nowadays, the fan has the ultimate power, and they're discovering people. So when you're a talented illustrator or photographer or an artist, you are now competing against other people that are popping up all over the world that can go directly to these people, and you need to, you know, sort of the challenge is now on us to explain why we are worth $10 for our time.
I think it's very fundamental that we find some way to preserve the basic principle behind copyright, which is that we each have a right to the work that we create ourselves. Because if we lose that right in the name of the public interest, we're going to lose a basic human right that's been hard fought for and dearly maintained for centuries. And then we'll have to fight for it from the start all over again.
You cannot monetize that which you cannot exclusivitize.